rethinking measurement. So some of the issues that were brought up around how can we collect different kinds of evidence, and what do psychometrics mean in this new context? What does fairness mean? This panel will be moderated by my colleague trustee at ETS and also the chancellor of the California State University System, Dr. Millie Garcia.
I know we stand between you and lunch, so we're going to get right into it. I am so pleased to begin this by framing the conversation. Traditional learning assessment may tell us whether a student has arrived at the correct answer, but they often tell us very little about how they got there. And in today's collaborative, digital, and increasingly AI-supported learning communities, that gap matters. This session explores a provocative idea that skills like collaboration, persistence, and problem solving may be best understood through behavior, through process, through interaction, and through choice, rather than very isolated outcomes. And the question is not just whether we can measure these signals, it's whether we can do so responsibly, equitably, and in ways that truly reflect learning. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists. Ben Domingue researches learning analytics, measurement, and the interpretation of behavioral data as an associate professor here at Stanford Graduate School of Education. Kristen DiCerbo leads learning science at the Khan Academy with deep experience using process data to inform learning design. And Dr. Lydia Liu brings expertise in assessment innovation and AI-enabled measurement from her work at ETS. Thank you, panelists, for being here. Let's start, Lydia, with the first question. What important skills do traditional assessments consistently fail to capture? And why is that the case?
Thanks, Millie. We promise to be a social, culturally responsible panel so we don't become the barrier between all of you here and lunch. We'll be very efficient. So for this question, I think there are a number of reasons. It's typically the complex, multi-dimensional skills that traditional assessment has challenges assessing. Victor in the first panel talked about the confusing definition for critical thinking. And when we think about assessments, a lot of the assessments for durable skills do not have a clear definition, even for constructs, competencies that have been around for a long time. Critical thinking is a perfect example. It has been researched for over 100 years. And when we looked into the definition, we found at least 31 of them. So when you have the disconnect between the assessment and the definition, there is a challenge. And then context is another challenge. Many of the previous panelists talk about we need assessments that are contextualized. So many times we only target a fraction of the definitions, and also the assessments are not engaging, and the students do not see themselves in the assessment. We have to pay attention to context. Last night at my dinner table, I was telling a few friends that I was helping my 11-year-old with his homework, and one of the questions was, which one of the following is a passing grade, A, B, C, and F? He looked at me and said, well, it depends on if you have an Asian parent or not. So this guy definitely understands the context of assessment. And then we lack innovative assessment format in thinking about measuring some of the complex skills. We need new tools. Like, for example, communication. It has the verbal dimension and non-verbal dimension. Traditional assessment only gets at the verbal ones, the grammar, the choice of words, the syntactic features. But what about your facial expression, your gesture, posture? We need new methods to assess them. And last, probably most important, is the scalability of assessment. We have invented so many different formats, tools, and applied new psychometric methods. But when we think about scalability, so many times that is the one barrier that holds us back. When you think about authentic submission of student evidence to prove their skills, many times the data come in a non-machine readable format. It takes a huge amount of manpower to code them, analyze them. When we think about performance assessment, very authentic, but if it requires 3 readers on site and code and do the reconciliation, it's not scalable. But these are also the challenges that make it exciting for us who work in the assessment field to tackle these challenges and make strides in our innovation.
Thank you. Now, Ben, Lydia touched a little bit about this, but what do we mean by direct observations and assessment? What counts and what doesn't?
So in my day job, I primarily think about kind of large-scale standardized assessments or other, assessments that get used in educational context or clinical context. And I think those have a certain flavor that's really important. They're standardized for one. They get used for decision-making in ways that mean they really need to have certain properties. But I think for today's conversation, I've been thinking less about my day job and more about my experiences as a learner. And so, as an example, I'm a Spanish language learner, and I'm working really hard on my Spanish, and I'm trying to monitor my progress. But the only tools that I can find are kind of these multiple choice questions that really don't capture much about what I hope is my evolution as a Spanish speaker. And it seems like there's so much more that we could do with assessments that don't have to have the same kinds of they don't need to meet the very stringent kind of demands that we place upon large scale assessments. And they could use much more observational, or they could use data that one would be very kind of reluctant to include in standardized assessments, but that could be repurposed here. And so I think that there's just so much opportunity for the use of this kind of data, and it'll be exciting to see what people start to do with that data.
Go ahead, jump in.
And I agree. And I think it might be helpful to think about this for those in the evidence-centered design world, that as we think about what is this idea of behavioral, there's, I think, 2 things we're talking about. One is different kinds of task models, like what are the things and the activities that we can do differently? And then the other is what are our different kinds of evidence models? How are we thinking about new and different kinds of information that we're counting as evidence, and how we then combine that evidence potentially with AI that can detect patterns that we can't, or what that looks like. But I think it's good for us to be crisp about which of those things we're talking about as we're talking about behavioral observation.
Thank you both. And now that we agree behavior matters, the next issue is, how does AI help us make sense of it? So I'm going to turn to Kristen. How can conversations, interactions, and workflows serve as valid indicators of complex competencies? Easy question.
Sure. So it links to what I was saying. So if we're thinking about new kinds of activities that we're asking students to do, new kinds of task models, and we think about validity, AI actually is opening up new kinds of things we can ask students to do that are much closer to the actual real world thing we want them to do. So if we're talking about validity, is this actually assessing the skill we want them to apply in the real world? We can see a student having a conversation. We can see a student thinking about, asking them, what are you thinking as you're solving this problem? And so what we're really doing there is closing the inferential distance that we're making from the thing we observe them do to the inference we want to make about what they know and can do. And so I would argue that actually closing that distance so that the thing we observe them to do is closer to the thing we're interested in is actually increasing the validity of some of our assessments. So I think that's one of the big pieces that we can think about with whatever these are that can help us think about validity and more valid assessments.
Thanks. And Ben, you want to jump in? Go right ahead.
Thanks. If I could add, a lot of the behavioral-based assessment or conversation-based assessment share one common characteristics. And in the course of conversation, multiple competencies are elicited. You have communication and you often have critical thinking or even collaboration. In that case, it really requires us to have a solid conceptual foundation so we understand what are the competencies we're looking for, what are the primary ones, what are the secondary ones. And it also requires us to have a clear rubric so we can score the evidence and quantify them. Without the solid conceptual framework and the rubric, all we have is overwhelming amount of data and evidence, and then we cannot disentangle the data and results are not explainable.
Thanks. So Ben, these questions, as I read them, are really going very deep. What new insights emerge from process data, timing, sequences, revisions, pauses, that outcome data misses?
So I think that, process data has been a very kind of actively, it's an area of interest given that we're collecting all of this information already. And I think that there are types of process data like timing, response times that are very valuable in terms of helping us track whether people are engaged with whatever they're doing. But I personally just wonder how much data there is in some of the click streams and those forms of data. It's just not obvious to me. I think that there's a lot that could potentially be done, but I wonder if we need to work harder to develop items that actually would allow the thought processes that we're trying to discern become apparent in the course of watching a student complete those items. And the other thing I would add, I've long had this pet theory that there should be like an uncertainty principle for items where you can have items that are meant to measure or items that are meant to instruct, but the more an item does of one, the less it'll do of the other. And I think that understanding process data is likely going to require us to kind of grapple with that issue more thoroughly than we have in the past.
Thanks. Now, Lydia, I know that really this has been touched on already, but I'm going to ask again. How can multimodal assessment be used in a scalable way to measure real-world competencies?
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question. Real world, as I think about examples for real world applications, I think of career and technical education. You want people to know how to fix your car, how to help a patient in the hospital, how to assist a hotel guest navigating all kinds of issues. ETS is currently collaborating with OECD on an initiative called PISA-VET. VET stands for Vocational Education and Training. Here we call it CTE. And this initiative means to benchmark CTE performance across country, identify the factors associated with positive performance, and really gap the distance between education and employers. So when we think about innovative CTE assessment, where traditional assessment started from multiple choice, paper pencil of knowledge tests. And then as we evolved, we designed simulation tasks that can be used as a proxy to look at what CTE students can do. And now a most authentic way of assessing CTE domains could be live demonstrations. So if you want to know if somebody can fix a helicopter, you just give him the helicopter and they look at it. So, but in that case, typically it requires multiple human raters doing the observation and looking at the scoring rubric that's predefined, and then do the reconciliation in their scoring. If we have to take that model to 20 countries, that will be cost prohibitive and it will be a logistic nightmare. So we are working with international research teams, giving the CTE learners the VR glasses to capture what they do, to capture the entire process. Like, for example, for automotive technician, we look at if they can conduct an inspection and diagnosis, if they can rectify the issues through maintenance service and repair work. And in cases the VR glasses are not sufficient to capture the data, for example, in cases we want to know if they can press the right amount of pressure, we then give them pressure sensing gloves So all the data can be transmitted, and then we can do the back-end analysis. We're still making progress. There's no done conclusion yet that this new innovative way of assessment can revolutionize the CTE assessment. But I think we're making a lot of progress.
Well, when you perfect that, make sure California State University knows how to do that. So
Duly noted.
then Ben mentioned that this isn't the first time we've heard about process data. So I'm going to ask Kristen, can you tell us about other attempts to capture and understand process data and why this hasn't worked yet? And then everybody else can jump in.
Yeah, so when I heard the topic of this panel, I said, I cannot sit here with a straight face and talk about how fantastic process data is going to be without talking about the history of some of these conversations that have been going on for a long time. So let's jump back to 2012 to 2014. There was this amazing initiative called Glass Lab. And Glass Lab was going to create game-based assessments. And we had ETS. I was at Pearson and joined it. Gates funded us. Like all the people here were working on it. Britta was evaluating it. The idea was we could gather all this process data from kids playing games and understand what they know and can do. Now, you might look around and realize we are not playing SimCity EDU to understand student systems thinking right now. We're not playing Mars Generation 1, another game we developed to understand students' argumentation skills. And it turned out, as we did this work, I could tell many different pieces, but relevant to this panel, there's a lot of noise in that data. When kids are playing games, there's just tons of things they're doing. So, for instance, we had created this city and kids had to troubleshoot and diagnose what was going on in the city. What does it mean if a kid bulldozes the entire city? Who knows? How do we interpret that? Does it mean they understand the system or does it just mean bulldozing things is fun? Probably the latter. But there was so much noise. Literally, as we started creating these really fantastic Bayesian networks to make our inferences, there were like maybe 6 pieces of evidence that in 45 minutes or an hour of gameplay that were really meaningful for what we were trying to capture. So I want to just be clear that it isn't the case that all the data is great and we can just create these. We have to continue to develop tasks thoughtfully and think about the evidence that they produce and how we're going to use that evidence and what that looks like, because we've been down this path and let's not repeat the mistakes we've already made.
So let's see if I can effectively build on that. So, I mean, as I mentioned, process data, as I kind of think about it, is just, what are the We've very thoughtfully designed some items that we're using to assess some construct, and what can we get for cheap along the way? Can we get how long it took for a person to respond, the different things that they clicked on, just the kind of the stuff we can passively collect, not because we designed it to necessarily be super informative, just because it's kind of there for free. And I do think that there's really good work in this space. You can find studies showing that kids that use certain kind of strategies to explore some more interactive problem are more likely to achieve a better solution. But I think, as you noted, you often have kids just bulldozing things because we've asked them to explore an environment and they're going to fully explore that environment.
Thank you. And so at what point does inference from behavior become speculation? And Lydia, how do we draw defensible boundaries?
Yeah, I think so. Observations are straightforward, but the reasons underlying the observations are not. There could be a lot of alternative explanations. Like we know perseverance in math learning or problem solving is important, but when we see when a student skip questions, we should not jump to conclusions that they don't have perseverance in math learning. Maybe they are being very intentional about their problem-solving strategy. And also, some of the behavioral signals, they're culturally loaded. And we should really not jump to conclusions and make inference about what they mean by showing certain behavior. Because just simply shaking your head could mean disagreement in some cultures, but it could mean I'm hearing you in others. That's why cognitive interviews could be very helpful for us to understand what students are exactly thinking, what's the underlying reason. And also AI-powered chatbot, they could intervene, they could help us get at the underlying reasons.
Thank you, because you're actually talking about the unintentional disadvantage for individuals if we're looking at behavior and understanding that. So thank you very much. Now to Ben, what privacy, consent, and transparency considerations arise when collecting rich behavioral data?
So privacy is so most of what I do now is try to build data resources to improve psychological measurement research. And I think privacy in psychometrics has often been used as a kind of shield for people to just not share data that really could be shared. And so I think privacy is critical, but I think privacy is something that stops us from kind of learning more, from doing more with the data we have is something that really irks me. So I guess I just wanted to say that up front. When we're, recording kids and doing these kinds of things that are much more intensive, we're going to have to navigate, the issues associated with that. I don't think people have I don't personally have a really good sense for what actually constitutes PII anymore. That's, I think, a very challenging question. And, just the more data we're able to collect passively, the harder that question's going to become. So I think this privacy issue is real. But the other thing I think that, I'm going to say it even if you didn't mention it, I think transparency is really important. And I would say that I think getting people to getting public trust behind some of the things we're building, I think will be a little bit easier if people are more open to sharing their data. I think that's a really important feature of building tools that the public will want to use.
And you mentioned consent, and I think, that we've heard stealth assessment, we've heard the idea of, do people know they're being assessed, and should they always know if their data are being used to make judgments about them? And where are the stakes in that as they're trying to do that? And is it the case if you're in a classroom and it's just you and your teacher that you should expect that, the teacher's using this information to help plan their instruction, and that's a formative assessment? And where's the break when there should be, more consent to, yes, this is data that's being used to make judgments about whether I get into college, whether I'm getting this job, and those kinds of things. So I do think in this space where the barrier between learning and assessment that I think many of us want to see lessen also raises questions about consent and understanding.
And that's what transparency. So thanks. So Kristen, since you still have the mic there, how should education systems use behavioral signals as formative feedback, summative evidence, or something else entirely?
Yeah, I think this starts to come to that previous point as well. Certainly, one of the things that I like about being at Khan Academy is we are low stakes, and so we can try, hey, let's have 10,000 kids explain their reasoning and see what happens and what it gets. And there's no stakes really attached to that. It's, another minute of their practice activity and seeing what happens there. And let's see if we can, if there's reasonable and we're getting new information by doing that. And so I think that the place to start anytime we're thinking about new ways of assessment, new ways of understanding what students know should be in those, as we said in the previous panel, pre-assessments maybe. Maybe it's the formative assessment, low stakes situations where we're still understanding these tools and what they can do.
Go ahead, Lydia.
If I may add, as we think about creating the system for summative or formative purposes, we have to think about the decisions we make to recognize, to reward certain experiences, because it should not be experienced for one group of students. As we think about what counts as authentic experience and from diverse backgrounds, take leadership as an example. We should celebrate kids who are captains on varsity sports teams. We should celebrate kids who founded nonprofit organizations with high-profile board members. But that's not the only celebrations we should have. We should also recognize kids who take care of younger siblings, who regularly plan for their school routines, preparing their meals and coordinating their transportations. We need to make sure experience for students from a diverse backgrounds are celebrated and recognized in the system.
So I just wanted to add on that. A former student from the GSE, she's now at Tufts, and she's gotten really interested in documenting the degree of caregiving that kids are doing for younger siblings, for older adults. And it's a pretty staggering number of kids doing it. And I totally support your view that we should support those kids and celebrate their work.
So thank you all for a fascinating discussion and insight. We're going to ask you for a lightning round, and I think we'll have 10 minutes for questions. So if you have questions, let's get ready. Okay. So today's conversation, let me see. We'll call this the lightning round. What must be true for behavior-based assessment to earn trust at scale? Who wants to jump in? Go for it.
Okay, I'll try to go first. So I'm just thinking about this as a learner, like I'm thinking about what I want. And I think at the moment, if you want an individual bit of content, there's so much you can find. I know excellent Spanish instructors online. If you want to learn technical stuff, there are amazing videos. If you've never watched the 3 Blue, 1 Brown guide, do yourself a favor. But what I don't see is systems that can kind of take what you're doing and coordinate a broader portfolio of work. They can't build a curriculum for you so effectively, at least not that I've observed. And seeing that and then experiencing that and enjoying it and learning from it as a learner, that would be what would make me trust the system.
Kristen?
I think to get trust at scale for new assessment measures, they have to give people information they don't otherwise have. I know a lot of teachers. I was one time at a conference and someone was putting up this big complex engagement detector that was based on, machine learning understanding. And I was sitting next to a teacher who said, I have an engagement detector. It's called my eyes. And it was just like, yep. So what is this assessment contributing that we haven't had before, and the information that the folks that are using the data haven't been able to see before?
Lydia?
To me, the assessment will need to be theory-driven, tested for validity, and considers all. It may not work for all, but let's consider all.
Kristen, you want to do
All
closing
right,
remarks?
I'll start off some closing remarks.
And then we'll turn it.
I think that as we heard on the panel from Sarah from OpenAI, the AI models are quite good now. I would say I still can't get a model to give me a standards-aligned question that actually is, at grade appropriate for that student and what it's doing. So I'm not sure we're like, hey, the models are ready for us yet to do all of this yet. And so I think it's just good for us to keep I'm optimistic about where they can go and keeping a clear eye about what they can actually do right now. And doing both of those things at the same time can be challenging and difficult as things are changing in real time. So I think that's one of the challenges for us, is to see the future at the same time we're living in the present.
Thank you. Ben?
Maybe as a final note, I guess I would just say, these systems are going to be designed with optimizing in mind, making efficient use of time. But I worry that will sometimes crowd out opportunity for exploration and discovery and more creativity. And I don't think people are unaware of that, but trying to figure out that balance seems really critical to me.
Thank you. Lydia?
I'm extremely excited to be here today, listening to all the conversations. It reminds me again that assessment work is not done alone. We have a lot of challenges, but it means we also have so many opportunities to innovate, to make strides and to push the boundaries. And when I look across the room, I see so many partnership opportunities, and I hope that this is the beginning of many conversations to come.
I want to thank the panelists. I walk away very excited about what we can do at the California State University with the wonderful work that you are all doing, because as we see, students want to learn differently, and observation is extremely important for our diverse students. So thank you all for these amazing comments. Thank you.